Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Council Business Planning Committee of the Whole for the Town of Lincoln. This evening, members that are here include Councillor Diane Regima on my far left, Deputy Mayor Diane Regima, I apologize, Councillor John Pachariva. On my right, far right, is Councillor Tony Brunet. Next to him is Councillor Lynn Timmers, and next to her is Mayor Sandra Easton. And I'm Rob Foster. I am a councillor here within the municipality as well. Staff-wise this evening, I'm surrounded by two Kirks. I have Michael Kirkopoulos here, who's our CAO, and I have Julie Kirkelos, the two Kirks on my right. Also, we have Carrie Beattie, who is our Senior Communications Advisor, Paul Diani, our Economic Development Officer, and Maria, you're here as well. Maria Brigantino. I always get that wrong, so. Anyway, we're all here. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Jacqueline, that wasn't ticked off. Oh, yes, it is. Jacqueline Buchanan, who's our HR coordinator. This meeting is starting really well, so just...
Wait till you get to my last name.
Just don't crawl to it.
That's right. This evening, unfortunately, a couple of the other councillors are away, but we do have quorum this evening, so... do we have any declarations of interest before we begin? Seeing none. On the agenda, there's going to be one slight adjustment. Mr. Kirkopoulos will be giving a verbal report on the plans around a review of the library. So that will be discussed a bit later. So, would I like that addition? Approve that? Yes, if you wish to approve it. Are you guys okay with that? Okay, good. So this evening we have two delegations, and we're going to first start with Mario Davidis, and it's the Niagara Workforce Planning Board concerning our regrowth in Lincoln.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's great to be back in Lincoln today. We really enjoyed the first time. We've had some great kind of relationship growth within the town of Lincoln, and obviously you've probably heard that the census has came out, and there's lots of new juicy statistics and data to hopefully lead not only municipalities but a lot of other businesses in the area and citizens across the country. So we've spent some time digging into Lincoln a little bit more. I've prepared a PowerPoint here, and I'm going to flag that I'm not going to take you through every single slide. There's a lot of information there that I'm leaving with you, so I'm going to skip over a couple of them, but I'll let you know when I'm actually going through those slides. So I guess just for context purposes, a planning board, there's 25 of them within the province of Ontario. We're all funded through the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skill Development, and we act as pretty much the voice for labor market intelligence within communities across Ontario. We have access to certain data sets that other groups don't have. We get funded to purchase really unique data, whether it's, different types of commuter flow, which you'll see shortly, to lots of other interesting things to help a lot of strategic planning and economic development strategies. So hopefully you'll find this PowerPoint as a really good tool that you'll use with your ECDEV strategy. So to start, I wanted to take you through a little bit of a kind of a template of Niagara and what kind of we're dealing with in terms of Lincoln's comparison to the region as a whole. So this slide is kind of my kind of kitchen sink in terms of the key information that folks should know about the region of Niagara. So you'll see our top employment sectors there in stars. You'll see how our businesses in Niagara are composed. So a large portion of them you'll see, 1 to 9 represents roughly 72%. You could see some of our growth in terms of our unemployment rate. So we've rebounded pretty nicely from the recession. In recent months, we've actually had record-breaking unemployment in Niagara. This summer, we saw record-breaking unemployment rates, positive ones for youth in terms of who are working across Niagara, which is also a huge positive. And I would say numbers that we haven't seen in roughly 10 to 12 years. So those were really great numbers as a whole for Niagara. Continuing on the Niagara piece, just to give you a little bit more of a quantifiable number, and you'll see that in this presentation. There's a lot of quantifiable numbers. A big piece that we do as a planning board is, and I would say my personal kind of, mission as the CEO of the planning board is really to start myth-busting some of those, facts that we run with across Niagara and in other municipalities. We've got access to Stats Canada, Canada Business Counts, tax filer data that really gets to put some quantifiable visuals to what you're seeing. So you'll see here, as an example, the amount of enterprises within Niagara. And if you look at it, how large the percentage is from 1 to 20. So that's 85% of the businesses in Niagara. Very similar to the province of Ontario. So when you're kind of focusing on some of your diversified workforce, which you'll slowly see as a positive in Lincoln as well, you'll see that in that composition. And so you'll see that won't be too much different than Niagara or the province as a whole, but it's important to know that from a foundational standpoint. So that was kind of Niagara. See a question there? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, with this slide, are we talking about full-time employee positions or?
Oh, these are just firms, so the size of businesses. So you'll see shortly what those positions are. These are just companies. So how many companies are there within roughly the Niagara region? There's an approximate 13,000 companies within the region. So these are all firms that have more than one employee.
So the full-time, part-time, doesn't matter?
Yeah,
right?
it's a mix. It's
Okay.
it's just proving that there are companies that are existing within the 1 to 4 employee bracket.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Dedivitis, zero employee firms, is that limited partnerships, sole proprietorships?
So yeah, that would be your realtors. That would be your, the accountant that doesn't have any staff. Exactly.
Prestige Worldwide.
So moving on to Lincoln's workforces. So this is where we really drill down to see where Lincoln is. So you could see within the township of Lincoln, within the 1 to 4 employee bracket, that's roughly 50% of the makeup of the town of Lincoln. So we've seen this and we've shared this with, the local Chamber of Commerce to say, are your programming really zoned in to 50% of the businesses that are occupying your township? So you'll see some of these numbers. Now, we've put this into contexts within the actual Niagara region as well. So we can give you a little bit of a breakdown to how that compares, and that was on the slide previous. So you'll see that there is pretty good breakup here in terms of the distribution of firms. So, I'm looking at something that's 20 to 49, 12%. So there's 108 businesses. When I compare that to the actual province of Ontario, and I said there was roughly 85% that was 1 to 20. So you've actually got a couple companies there, 108 of them to be exact, that are actually 20 plus. So I would say, those are, it might not be a huge number, but there is an existence of, companies there in that bracket. And when you actually look at this, and we've shared this with city staff, when you're comparing this to Ontario or other municipalities in Niagara particularly, those numbers don't particularly hold, especially for a township that is of your size population-wise. So that's a positive. You'll see the next slide, the top industries. So where are these jobs? So again, you'll see each slide just starts to drill down deeper and deeper. So I've told you, your 1 to 4 is 50%. So where are those industries? So you've seen a lot of growth here in some of these areas. You've seen, healthcare and healthcare and social assistance rise. You've seen wholesale trade rise a lot, same as accommodation and food services. So accommodation and food services might have a big component to tourism. Now, you might see on this chart, there's not a table that actually says, where is the tourism sector in Lincoln? That is because that industry is not listed in isolation. Stats Canada, believe it or not, doesn't see tourism as a bucket. They see tourism following in accommodation and food services. They see tourism falling into manufacturing. They see tourism falling into retail trade. Now, while they don't actually articulate that, that's not to say that the planning board can't do that for you. We can certainly drill down at the tourism industries that apply to all of these descriptors to tell you a real good visual of how many firms are actually doing the business of tourism in our modern day definition.
Councillor Patrieve and then Councillor Njima.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question back to the tourism. Why wouldn't that be included when it's included in the balance of payments that the federal government does through StatsCan?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing that we've pressed Stats Canada for. So we've taken that to an Ontario Chamber of Commerce resolution.
Okay.
We've presented that to say, you're speaking the language 50% of the time,
Yeah.
and you're not doing it in the other sense. Similar to, I was in Grimsby and will be in West Lincoln. Our good data that comes out of some municipalities here goes to Hamilton. And, you can bet your boots that they're using that when they're, putting applications for funding. The other thing you'll see here that I'd like to bring up is the agriculture number. It shows a pretty big drop. And that might seem like, I don't necessarily believe that. And the reason why that drop is there is, again, how Stats Canada records agriculture. So farms that employ independent contractors, other known as migrant workers, do not get recorded in this. So as migrant workers pick up and that industry is growing and growing, Stat Canada does not recognize as an agriculture service. So that is a subcontracted body. So again, it's another issue that we've taken to the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to say, how can we grow business within the region of Niagara if some of our greatest assets aren't actually allowed to be recorded properly? So you might be investing into a plan that has more agricultural services, but when Stats Canada or the federal government pulls up your footprint in agriculture, they would look at this number. So it's another thing to stay kind of cognizant of when you're communicating that impact. So again, you might not see the tourism item here, but we can gladly, and we've been working through Mike to get a better sense of clarity on how that is growing. In some recent numbers of that, we've seen some really good growth in terms of tourism within the town. So it's definitely, and you could even see here from accommodation and food service to see that gain as 11%. What you can also see here is, again, this is another drilled down level of what we can do. The knock on some of those industries are, well, Mario, those don't pay well. We want to attract good jobs. So these are the top occupations for people within Lincoln. So you could see Lincoln's economy is offering 502 jobs within transport and heavy equipment. And if you can look at some of the wages here, these are your top 5 occupation buckets. And, look, as a positive for you folks, most of those are actually above minimum wage, and they're well above minimum wage. So you'll see one area that is in and around the $13, $14 range, the service and support and other service occupations. But Lincoln's primary 5 big buckets of jobs are actually above the minimum wage. So we actually dug a little deeper to this because I envisioned this would be probably a question. Well, what's the impact of minimum wage to Lincoln? In our estimation, it's roughly 10%. In terms of Ontario, when we look at this type of data, so I've just kind of broken down occupations within the town, we can do this across the entire province. So we had the privilege of sitting with Minister Sousa on this matter, and we discussed what this impact would be for Niagara. So it was 1 in 5 positions within Ontario will be impacted, 1 in 4 in Niagara will be impacted, because if you go back to my first slide that had those stars, many of those stars have an average that are dancing around the minimum wage fee. So, however, the town of Lincoln is not as affected as that as one would probably first imagine. So another positive for you folks as well. Moving forward, you could see some of the characteristics of how most governments will, monitor one's economy. So what we've done here is we've taken a week within May 1st to May 7th and broken it down from a municipality level, which is not the easiest thing to do. Generally, they keep it within a regional census subdivision. But for your sake, and because we've been doing a lot of services with Lincoln, we wanted to break that down to you from a Lincoln perspective. And you can see that's a pretty impressive unemployment rate that the town has. And the future slides will only show you how many people are actually working within the town of Lincoln. Your workforce is not only diverse, it is also active. your participation rate seems to be higher than the region as a whole. So there is more good news there, and that seems to be trending in a positive way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, I see our participation rate, the proportion of the working age population currently employed or looking for work. So I'm curious, how do you define working age population?
So that's if you just stopped looking for work. So there's a certain period of time that it's deceiving, because if one's unemployment rate is low, that is only good if your participation rate is high. They want to know how much of the population, the working age, so 15 and above, is actively looking for work. So those folks that aren't looking, that are, say, on Ontario Works, they fall out of the labor market. So for all intensive purposes, they're non-existing. So if you've stopped looking for work for a period of time, you've fallen out of a statistical labor market perspective. So knowing that that is actually high means that there's a good amount of people within the town, 15 above, that are actually working.
Yeah,
So certainly a positive.
thank you.
So the next slide gets even more interesting. And I would say when I first started around the planning board providing some myth busting, something that just came out recently is commuter flow. So how many people are actually driving out of Lincoln to go to work? Or where are the people of Lincoln, residents of Lincoln, working? We could also tell you that. So this slide actually shows you how many people commute within the census subdivision. And you'll see the slide next to you breaks that down. So the census subdivision would be how many people are actually working within the town of Lincoln. 2,800 people of the working population, so the 9,000 or so, are working within the town. You'll see another 3,200 are working within Niagara. And then the 3,275 are people that are actually working outside of Niagara. So you could see, and when I have looked at other municipalities, and I would say I've looked at other regional municipalities, and being part of a planning board of 25 across the province, I get to look at a lot of other municipalities as well. 30% is solid. That's especially for a smaller town. You would not imagine 30% of your working population is working within the town of Lincoln. So again, it speaks to your diversified workforce. The next slide breaks down to the T. Where those people are going. So you might be wondering, Mario, how do you know that 1,605 people are working in Hamilton? That is the new census. That is the new census that was done, and that reported this. Where we've actually provided some additional services for the town of Lincoln, we're in the process of telling you this, is what occupations are these people doing? So are they driving out to do agriculture? Are they driving out to do manufacturing? Shortly, and I would say in the next probably couple months, we're going to be able to pair this with their actual job and their income. And what we're trying to do is develop hotspots for Mike and his staff to say, where in Lincoln are people working? Are they related to GO transportation areas? Are they related to transport areas? So we're working with the region on this, the same level of information. The next slide articulates those working in Lincoln. So you'll see a lot of the folks, again, 2805 in Lincoln, some of them going to St. Catharines, some of them going to Grimsby. So that was that breakdown of most of the people within Niagara working. So again, that level that everyone's driving out to go to Toronto, not particularly the truth. The truth would be that majority of our people are going to Hamilton to work. And this is similar to, the city of St. Catharines, which I'd say you're the first ones that are getting this information from us, because we've been doing a lot of work with you folks. So that story that we're losing a lot of people driving to Toronto now might not be entirely true. However, if you build up the cost this is on infrastructure, and you add up how many people are driving to Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, Mississauga, it still lends that story that, hey, there's a lot of people within Niagara that could be benefiting from a GO. But the story that we're losing people simply to the city of Toronto, or they're working there, we can start telling you to a more quantifiable number what those industries are. And maybe we have those industries, and maybe they're growth industries for us. But until you actually see what jobs they're doing, I like to say you're operating kind of with one hand tied behind your back when we shouldn't be, because this information is open for you. The next bucket goes into population. So we've done a little work trying to articulate how Lincoln has done there. So since the last 2016, since the last census in 2015, you can see Lincoln was the fourth highest growth rate within Niagara at a 3.8% growth. So again, really positive numbers there. You could see, we dated it back from 2001 to 2015. So growth has consistently happened over the 15 years. So that should be, enough comfort to say, hey, we are still growing. Wouldn't it be nice to know where we are growing? That is something that we can tell you as well. So this chart breaks down your growth numbers from 2011 to 2016 and provides you a percentage of change. So you could see in terms of lots of different planning structures here, where some of that growth is happening. So yes, there is some growth around the 50 to 79 range. I would say very similar to the figures of Niagara. That is not an abnormality. What is something that's abnormal, and I would say most people jump to that seniors rate. I would like you to jump to the first one, the 0 to 9. And there's a 10% increase. Now I know we're talking 2,400 to 2,700. And that's just part of your population, but there's still a growth there. And when I'm looking at the 20 to 29, the 30 to 39, there's some growth there as well. So usually, if we're looking at a town that has some of the, and I'm not running from those numbers that are 50 to 79, they're in the teens, those are high. They are similar to Niagara across the board. What isn't similar to Niagara across the board is that 0 to 9, or that 30 to 39. So again, I would say, Lincoln, Grimsby is seeing more positive traction in these areas. And in my estimation, when we look back at the 15-year trend, it probably is not going away. So it poses some challenges there because you're basically drawing both. So I'm sure you're well aware of that. But again, this provides some context for you. When I said it wasn't that much different than Niagara, I'm a man of my word, so I want to provide that chart for you as well. This puts it into the broader context to say, here's where you are compared to Niagara on all of these age brackets. I won't go through all these, but that theme that I kind of told you about is pretty high, is pretty true. So when you look at that 0 to 9, you're a couple percentages ahead. And that's, and we've also, I would say for this, pulled in Grimsby. Whereas, Stats Canada wouldn't, because it's associated with Hamilton. We've tied in other communities that are growing. So again, similar in most of these areas, and you're doing better in the ones that you want to be. I won't spend too much time here, or on the next, 4 or 5 slides, I'll quickly go over, because they're not probably huge surprises. Some folks have said, should we focus on immigration as a catch basin for us? By and large, we are a second option immigration place, which means folks will first arrive into Toronto, they will set up, place, and then we'll move to another community. That's what the Conference Board of Canada has indicated in terms of kind of a smart growth way. In terms of Lincoln, you could see majority of immigrants came before 1981. So it hasn't been an area that within the last 5 years had a lot of growth. You had 140. There potentially, I would say, is an opportunity that way. Knowing what we know when we look at immigration, we do a lot of work within this as well. There's a lot of data that validates the concept that maybe you might not get that people who arrive to Canada first, but luckily for, I say, all of Niagara, our affordability is one of our best attraction pieces. Those folks that have been living in York or Peel or, Halton for 10 years, those are the folks that typically tend to migrate. And we've got numbers on that as well. In terms of where people live, no shocker here, mostly a single detached home, an apartment building, 5-story, plus only 65. So when you're seeing or when you're hearing or feeling people saying, there's a shortage of, 5 stories pluses, it's nice to have an articulated number for that. I would say, more affordable housing, obviously that's not new to anyone across, and I wouldn't say Niagara, that's across the province as a whole. Other, curious information that they give you, are we doing well on married or living or common law? What does that look like? Official languages, again, you could see primarily English. This is one I'd like to spend a little more time on. So this is the individual income then and now, and then I'll go into household income. You would see that, again, across the board, you guys have increased. And again, it's a good significant increase as well. Now, the Lincoln 2006 census, you've seen that I've showed 2011 in other charts that said, well, Mario, you're comparing 2011 and 2016. However, for income, you're showing me 2006. That's because the 2011 survey was a national household survey. It wasn't accurate income data. So no economist would tell you, take a household survey and then compare it to census data. So that's why we were really thrilled that census data is back, because it's the most accurate way to measure income. You'll see your individual income, however, in that 10-year span has shot up. And it's shot up larger than Niagara as a whole. What we've done is also break down what does that look like from a head count. How many folks are actually above the $100,000 range individually, and how many are under 10? I would say to anyone who's a little alarmed about the 20,000 and less, this is anyone in the working age, which means 15 and above. Unless you were working for my family and if you were related to us, you didn't get paid. Household income is the next one. So you'll see that a huge jump here. So this is close to a $20,000 increase, the median household income. Again, much larger than where the region is as a whole. Close to doubling that. We're similar to Grimsby, good stuff happening in this end of the Niagara. So really positive numbers for Lincoln. And income shows a lot. Like, it is the biggest variable in terms of you cross-fertilizing that to another industry. So you could see if you're making more money, it speaks to your workforce. You've probably got more talented people there, and you've probably got more diverse jobs, which some of the slides before has shown. And I would say, a lot of people will ask us to do some crystal balling and forecasting. And the economists that we spend time with at the federal level will say, forecasting is putting together as much information as you can to make an educated guess. So I would say when you're taking all this, dare to do that. You're not going to get a utopian answer, but we're providing you with a lot of comfort information that could be able to tell you to stretch some of your goals or some of your ideas for your ECDEV strategy. Last one is the job market. So showing you what that looks like. So you're wondering maybe how we've measured job postings. So part of having a network of 25 other planning boards is we collectively, purchase things together. So this is an American aggregator that we've purchased, and we share the costs with the other 25 planning boards in Ontario. It is a very sophisticated piece of technology. It scrapes down every posting that is on Indeed, LinkedIn, Kijiji, a company's website, and tells me pretty much the aggregated number. And you could see, it'll shortly tell me a lot more. So now these are advertised jobs. So this is why I'm really big on asking companies to promote their advertised jobs. So you'll see the town of Lincoln had 374 in 2015, and then in 2016, 249. So you're wondering, maybe that looks like, wow, we lost a lot of jobs. Actually, yeah, you did, but you gained better jobs. So I'm actually pretty happy about this stat, because you'll see this next slide. What you've done is you've shown a very healthy, natural exercise of an economy. You started off with a lower amount of permanent and full-time jobs. Those jobs grew. Or you attracted more permanent jobs. You went from an 86% rating of a permanent job to a 98%. So those jobs that are now 249 are permanent jobs. And I'm in a province and in a country where our finance minister says, get used to precarious employment. If you could say 98% of your jobs are permanent, that's a pretty strong indicator to your workforce. As well, how they're full-time, and you could see some of the positive growth there. What were those actual occupations? This aggregator tells me as well. So these were a listing of some of the top ones that came up within 2016 and 2015. So you could see the growth there as well in, certain demand occupations. As well, that aggregator will tell me, what skills do people want? Typically, you list a skill in a job posting, that aggregator scrapes down all those. So, most of and this is from the 249 jobs that you had that were posted that year. So the hard skills, the soft skills, you could see the soft skills are a lot higher than the hard skills because the, modern workforce now is really relying on soft skills. They are comfortable to train you when you get in the doors. They want somebody who has these soft skills, a team player, detail-oriented. They want you to be a communicator. So essentially, what have we learned today? There's a list of different things here. I would say to add on verbally to this was, how diverse your workforce is, how a lot of those workforce elements are actually growing in really meaningful, quality ways. You actually employ a lot of people within Lincoln. The biggest place that people are leaving Lincoln is the city of Hamilton. So it's my promise to work through with Mike and city staff to find out what those people are doing in Hamilton, and can they have the potential of doing that in Lincoln, as well as to kind of, I guess, provide any comfort to anyone. It's nice to know that minimum wage has roughly a 10% impact here, as opposed to roughly a 25% impact in other cities and towns across Niagara. So a couple other areas I had said that we'll potentially look in for you as well. Again, I've been working with Paul and Mike and Carrie and Maria, a great team that you have here. And they've been nothing but accommodating and open and really innovative to work with. So if there's any questions, gladly we'll take any. And I've kind of left you my contact and my funny card here.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll start with Lynn.
Thank you, Chair Foster. I don't really have a question. I just, I really enjoyed reading this and going over all the stats, and I really feel we're quite positive in Lincoln. And some of the stories that people are telling each other that you're hearing are not accurate when you see it on paper.
Yep.
The rise of the minimum wage is not going to have such a huge impact on Lincoln by what we're seeing here. So that's a good news thing. That 30%, over 30% of people are living and working in Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And I found that really somewhat surprising, but very positive to see that on paper. I just feel really encouraged by this, and I'm in a search right now with my one son. He's searching for employment, and I'm trying to get him to find a job in Lincoln. And I'm being told, no, I have to leave Lincoln to find a job and what I want to do. And here I go. I've got something to back it up. So
yeah,
he needs to go over these numbers, and maybe he'll change his mind and realize that he can find a good job in Lincoln as well. So
coming from kind of somebody passionate about keeping young people here, I would certainly say that, and I'd welcome the chance to speak with him as well. And I would say to the first point. I've been in this role for about 2 years, and coming from another role where I was very much a marketing storyteller. A story is no good without any teeth and reality to it, and data is really boring without a story.
Yeah.
And I think now it's our region getting really comfortable managing and using data. And I would say, the one privilege in this role is I get to go to Waterloo, I get to tour London and Windsor and other places. Those, I like to say, winning communities, the KW kind of areas that are, doing some different things, and there's different workforces that are moving, they're comfortable with this stuff. And they're comfortable with the positive stories, and they're, up for a challenge on the negative ones. Sure. So I think it's us having to get that culture that, okay, we can stomach this and not run from it, and we could start using it and integrating it to making some long-range planning decisions.
Absolutely.
So, and that's across the region.
Oh, it's very, very interesting, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. I commend you all for being so open about it.
Mary Ston.
Thank you very much, Mario. And I heard your presentation at the chamber, the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and so I knew that these numbers were going to be quite positive for us. And I'm very interested as well in this living and working number. And I don't know whether this is an appropriate question for you, but has there been any analysis done on behavioral characteristics for people who have made a choice to live and work in their community and the level of engagement that they expect or anticipate or actually participate in?
Short answer is no. It'd be hard to kind of get at that unless we did some really sincere kind of consultations, which we're not opposed to. We've kicked around the idea because everyone will tell you, again, going through a lot of these planning boards, quality of place, everyone will argue that they got it. You don't spend 20 years living somewhere and you say that you have a poor quality of place. I would hope that that person would move. So we'd like to spend a little more time on focusing on, what are from the skill set perspective, those people that are living and working here, what are the skill sets that they're looking for? Because I can tell you that, we've done some work with the Niagara Industrial Association on this as well. And there is a good amount of inconsistency around what skills that people are looking for. And I think it's because, to the comment before, you hear something and then you run with it. So it might be, we tend to hire more people with this skill set, so we'll post that. And then it confuses those folks that are actually in that market looking for work, and it could certainly confuses young people and, parents of young people because they don't necessarily know what is out there or what they should be, speaking to their child about around what tangible skills that are there. We haven't done that yet, but I'd like to kind of, at a later date, kind of pick your head about what that would even look like. We're definitely a curious bunch. We pride ourselves at the planning board to be curious and to ask questions that people aren't asking or don't have the time to kind of look and investigate into.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to touch on the agriculture piece again. It really is quite a disappointment that the numbers are incomplete. And so I'm hoping that maybe this summer, with a little bit more face-to-face questioning, that those numbers might improve. But the minimum wage figures are definitely have a very negative impact on farmers with the migrant worker wages. So is that something that can be looked at separately?
Yeah, that would have to be a different kind of a conversation and investigation, because you're right. Since they're not classified as, in agriculture and they're independent contractors, it's hard to get at that. They're not listed that way. So to say how many of those folks are receiving it, and there's a lot of organizations and farms that, we've also spoken to, and we had spoken to Minister Sousa that particular day around, the different way that they do get compensated. So there might be, housing costs or other contributions that they get. And we're not saying one's good or bad, but what I'm asking for is a consistent way to measure that. Like, you can't slap a tag on a municipality and say, we're investing in ag or tourism, but then Stats Canada and feds and provincial, bureaucrats will say, well, when we look at it, it's not that high. So we need a more of a closer study. And I think we've talked about it internally on migrant workers. So then when we do actually advocate or ask our chamber friends at the OCC or even Stats Canada, they always host kind of like, how can we improve? It's nicer to pair that story again with data. But we would probably, leverage you folks to help us kind of set up these consultations so we can start to build a little bit more traction there that way. It'd be a long process, but one that would be worthwhile.
That's great. Mr. Chairman, I just have another question. Around the age cohorts, I'm not satisfied that the message is clear. It's still a bit fragmented, and I was wondering if, with the charts, if it's possible for you to develop, 2 or 3 sentences that clarify what it means when you start to group some of those ages together.
Okay.
And therefore, then we can, start looking, I think, at what potential impact it might be on demand for jobs in the future, because if there's that many people that are living and working here, and you look at the profile
Yeah.
of the communities here, there could be a major impact. I was really happy to see the figures in terms of trades.
Yeah.
And I think that also tells a story in terms of, you know, if people want to live close to home, obviously those kind of jobs are going to have to be available. And we do have work that we're doing on commercial and small manufacturing development in the town. I think these figures would be really, really important to anybody that's looking for a workforce. So, but the age thing has to be described differently. It seems still very fragmented. There's no strength to it. I think it's in there. It's
Yeah.
just, if you could do something with that to make that a more positive and more straightforward statement, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. We can probably pull that back. And I think when we get the commuter flow and occupation data as well, it'd be interesting to see if we can pair that with the age. So if we know 1,600 people are commuting out to Hamilton, what are they working in? And can we access who those people are from an age standpoint? Like, do we know that, you know, are they younger, are they older? So we could probably break down these numbers a little more clearer for you as well, or a little more granular level for sure, and pair it up with some background sentences on that and explanation.
Could I just ask a question, Mr. Chairman? It has nothing to do with the labor force, but it has a lot to do with how the labor force interacts with the community. Do you do any work on what's important to people in terms of where they shop and what they're looking for in terms of commercial enterprise?
So we haven't done that so much. Like we're growing to that. Like we're doing a lot of new work with, you know, with non-for-profits is one of them. Like we're working with, you know, a few non-for-profits in a few different cities around, you know, what they can expect from, you know, even some of their indicators internally and some of their market research as well. Like so there's some cities that have enterprise centers that have some of this, but they can't pair that with, you know, some of the income stuff. So, you know, I use the example of, you know, somebody starting a bike shop. We could tell you if there's an influx of bike shops within the town, and maybe there is or there isn't. But if you were setting up one in Niagara-on-the-Lake and there's, you know, 50 and there's their average sales and this is how many employees they actually employ, and then you could see in the town of Lincoln that there's not that many offerings for that, we can actually provide that information as well. So we're starting to interact more with business that way. Another really great way is how do you price people? Salary data is very hard to kind of get at, and so that aggregator allows us to do that. So we give a lot of companies, and we're working with a few of the larger ones here now, around how do you price somebody, whether it's a, you know, public relations coordinator to a truck driver. We're able to pull what is the low, medium, and high range within Niagara to any area in Canada. So we've, you know, pulled up British Columbia numbers, and we've pulled up, you know, up north in Northern Ontario numbers for firms that want to know that. So there's a lot that we can do to service, you know, just about anyone. Like I say, like a lot of this data about your market and your market intelligence, not just municipalities should be using this. So whether they're your local non-for-profits to say, you know, is our shelter needs growing? Are our food banks growing? We've been doing a lot of work with food banks on that to say, unfortunately, yes, they are. But when you're requiring more funds, again, it's that story to say, hey, our food bank is busting at the seams. Where we're giving you population trend data, we're giving you income data, we're giving you housing data to say, this needs to be looked at. So the few non-for-profits that we started to do some work with, have been, you know, smiling ear to ear around some of the data that we've, you know, provided them. And I would say, like, even from a, you know, like, is this costly? Like, we're here to serve our community. So there's fee-for-service things, but we're doing it at a rate that where we're trying to make our community grow. That's how we're, you know, our, I guess, triple bottom line, if you will.
That's helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And before I go to the other questions, just following up with what the mayor was saying, I think she's right on with the question on agriculture in the things, but I bet you, as you start going through and doing further analysis, there's going to be a lot of situations where people are saying, I'm in manufacturing, like if they're making wine or whatever the case may be. I mean, there could be some very strange anomalies in some of those numbers, so that'll be interesting. The other thing that she touched on was the ages, and those numbers haven't changed. The first time I saw, like the percentages type of thing, the first time I saw this, we were amazed with the fact that the young, which is 0 to 19, and the old, which is 60 and over, are about the same percentage in this municipality. And so that makes it very interesting for us when it comes to building things like recreational things and stuff like that. But that seems to be a consistency with this community. So,
And I would say with most of Ontario, there's a few different ones that have that, but it is a challenging place to have your positions. The other thing I would say on your first point is that the cross data, the biggest one within agriculture, unfortunately, as well as, I say farmers that, are harvesting grapes. If those grapes are used to sell wine, it's not listed as agriculture. Stat Canada lists it as a food, a retail trade. So even though you are harvesting the grapes and that's the main source of your business, if it's meant for sale, it's not listed as agriculture. So it's another bit that local folks who could advocate to change that aren't aware of that. Yeah. So when you push a strategy that is heavy in agriculture, you really need to dissect it and say, yeah, maybe the Stats Canada perspective doesn't, and we're doing with this with Mike's staff to say, this is what the tourism growth looks like in Lincoln. Don't look at it from, a NOC code that is actually not listed. It's sprinkled into like 10 different categories. So we have to pull them out of those 10 categories and then show you what that actual footprint is. Yeah. So a little bit of dancing, but we're pretty good dancers. So,
JD.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you, Mario, for coming in and the work that you and your staff have done on this report. I mean, it's fantastic. Having been a former economist at StatsCan, it takes a special skill to go through reams of data and tell a story. Yeah. You're a fantastic storyteller. Thanks. So, and this type of data, too, will allow us to make informed decisions going forward in future planning, policy development, and ECDEV opportunities. I mean, it's just tremendous. And the fact that you, said that you would take a look at the, the tourism sector, the ag sector, anything we can do to help. We're going to be going to AMO this year. It's in Ottawa. Maybe a little trip over to Tunney's Pasture early Sunday morning or Monday morning to get the ear of the economists there and the statisticians to help change these things. Because, I mean, we're hanging our shingle on we're a center for excellence in agriculture. Well, if it's not being properly captured, then we're, like you say, we're telling half the story. Yeah. I think we want to tell the same story. We want to sing from that same hymn book. So anything that we can do to help you grow will help us both grow and prosper together. And I think ultimately that's what we're after. And the age category too that you mentioned, Councillor Foster or Chair Foster had mentioned it. We hold. There was a presentation that we saw, and there was more youth under the age of 17 in the town of Lincoln than any place in Niagara. So we were able to establish after-school programs and child care centers and work with the region. And also when it came to sport and rec opportunities, to be able to say, we've got to give something for, the youth. There was more opportunities as a kid growing up here for me at a time when there was a few years ago, but we've been able to smooth that out. So, I mean, this stuff, keep it coming because it's fantastic.
Thank you for the kind compliments, and I would say I would throw it back at you folks because you're open to it. Again, so we're here, like we're all playing for the same team, and we certainly want to see the town succeed. So it's just ensuring that we're in constant communication, and, you know, Mike and his staff do a great job in ensuring that we're in the know and we're part of these, you know, work that's getting done, so we can inject anything that we can. And that is certainly reciprocal on our end. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor Njima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is about, so earlier on, we were speaking about the minimum wage hike, and at our Chamber of Commerce meeting the other day, that was discussed, and I know that there's a lot of information out there that may or may not be true about the effect that it's having on small business. And since 71% of the businesses in Niagara and a significant amount in Lincoln are small business, and I think that's probably important. I think that's going to continue. How can we wrap our minds around what the effect really is, and sort of whether there should be fear about that, or whether there shouldn't be a fear, or what we can do about it? Because we want people to be encouraged to continue to be entrepreneurial. So I'm wondering where can we look to figure that out? And if we wanted to supply information to our members and our board, what would be the best place to how to do that?
So I say, like, great question, and it's great that you're, you know, cognizant of it and you want to get ahead of it as well. So I think, you know, you're honest. Like I say, you keep people with kindness and honesty, and a lot of the data around minimum wage, it hasn't been shared in the sense of what is the true impact. So, you know, we've got numbers that we could certainly share with the staff to say, here's an Ontario perspective, the number of jobs in Ontario that are, you know, as long as you, and I would say as long as you filled in a tax report, which most of us do, that's how we're analyzing this data. So we can give you a perspective on how many people are affected in Ontario, how many people are affected in Niagara. So I had said it's 1 in 5 in Ontario, it's 1 in 4 in Niagara, and in Lincoln, we're batting around 10%. So, you know, even circulating that information, we've got like graphic designers and marketers on staff, so we put this stuff in a really, I know today might not be a good example of, you know, putting a large amount of data in an easy kind of one-page infographic, but showing folks out there, like, this is the impact. This is the amount of jobs out of the 9,300 and change that you have in the town of Lincoln. We can quantifiably tell you how many within a very close ballpark is affected by minimum wage. And when you see that and say, okay, well, out of the, you know, 9,000, 10% are affected. And then we can even roughly tell you the average of how far are they away from it. Because there's a difference, and I could say my other hat is, you know, a hospitality and real estate fella. And we've got 100 staff, and we run restaurants and development centers, so we're impacted by it too. So we've been ahead of the game and realized how many of our staff are actually going to be affected by it. Because that feeling of, you know, this is happening, yes, it's true, but I want it to be paired with information, so you know the full context of that. So we can gladly build you something that's small that could be circulated through your citizens, or it could be circulated to the town or the chamber to give you a quantifiable number of, you know, if it is affecting 10%, and it is affecting maybe 10% in occupations that aren't even possibly Lincoln's strongest. Because out of those 5 occupation buckets that I showed you, 4 of them were $20 and above. So a majority of those jobs weren't going to be impacted. Now, that's not the same across every municipality, but in yours, it is. So your residents could kind of feel a little easier that way. So we can gladly, you know, provide some honest and open communication in a very digestible fashion for you, and that could be turned around pretty quickly.
Okay, that'd be great. I'll follow up with some questions for you later on through LinkedIn or something.
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find, so.
Unless Councillor Bernay has any questions, I'm going to turn it over to staff. So we'll start with Paul and then Mike to finish things off.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee and to the presenters, well, I just want to echo the comments and thank Mario for being here this evening. We've had a few conversations, obviously, leading up to tonight, so Mario, thank you. You know, any good economic development strategy really starts with a foundational piece, and this is one of those pieces. Understanding our labor force, understanding who works here and where they go if they do leave the community will help feed into our strategy and identify how we continue to grow. You know, I'm very thrilled to see these numbers tonight and show that we do have a diversified economy. diversified workforce, which leads into our diversified economy. So it's a good basis from which to work with, and I look forward to continuing to work with Mario moving forward on these. And to Councilor Regima, if there are any follow-up questions you would like to ask, you can obviously funnel them through me, and I'm happy to work with Mario on those.
Thank you, and Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through Mr. Chairman, I think to dovetail on the last two comments made, I also want to thank Mario for his effort. He is a true asset to Niagara, and one of the first individuals I met when I took over this position, so I think he's been incredibly helpful. And I think when we look at this information and when we look at the data, and I think as a council, as an organization, as a community, we're trying to be much more informed by data before we make decisions and how we make decisions. This does impact the future strategic direction we need to be taking as an organization. And I think when we look at the benefits to government entities like ourselves, this helps us look at and I think share with the community what is the overall health and status of kind of our local economy and what's happening locally, as well as the benefits to employers, job seekers, and I think it allows us to understand our own workforce needs to the workforce needs of the community, and to figure out where we partner and where we assist and supplement. And you know, the next presenter is from Brock, talking about another initiative that we're partnering on. So you know, when you think about some of the things we're doing and where we're putting our efforts and where councils put their efforts over the last number of years, and this year in particular, I think this information is critical for us. So thanks to Mario and his team.
And on that note, there was almost a segue there, but thank you very much, Mario. The information was very good. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Keep up the great work.
And the segue, our second delegation we have tonight is Dr. Marilyn Jolineau from Environmental Sustainability Research Center at Brock University, and she's going to provide us a presentation on Brock Lincoln Living Lab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay.
So, to you, Mr. Chairman, maybe I could make just some quick opening comments. I thought it was important. I think we thought it was important. You've got an internal working group that's really comprised right now of Maria Brigantino, Carrie Beattie, and myself that are working with Brock in terms of some of the next steps as it relates specifically to the Brock Lincoln Living Lab. I forget how many weeks ago it was that Marilyn gave us a presentation talking about some of the next steps, talking about the needs assessment and some of the things you'll hear about today. Her passion for this work was contagious. You see her already smiling. I think this presentation, when we left it, we're like, wow, this is the type of individual leading the team on the Brock side that you want, I think, you know, helping to move a project like this forward. So we thought it was important for council to hear this information, for council to hear a little bit about what we're doing. This was announced with great fanfare. I think everybody has highlighted it. I recently received my alumni magazine, and there's a nice picture in there and a reference to this particular initiative, and it talks about why this is a great thing. And so I think, you know, on that note, I'll turn it over to Marilyn, and she can, I think, take you through with the same level of enthusiasm that she did for us, her presentation.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't typically get to come out into the community like this in this way in my position at Brock, so it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm here really representing the Environmental Sustainability Research Center, or ESSERC, at Brock University. The director of that center is Dr. Ryan Plummer, who's actually done a lot of the hard work in moving this initiative forward. So I just want to acknowledge his great work. And yes, I guess we started this partnership just under a year ago in signing a memorandum of understanding with the town of Lincoln. And there was quite a bit of work done leading up to the launch event of the Brock Lincoln Living Lab, which happened in early October. Some of you, I know, were at that event where we spoke about Living Labs and what that actually looks like for Lincoln, and a bit about how we can really engage with the community, and in particular have students get some experience in working in a community and taking what they learn from the classroom into the community. So my purpose really is to provide a little bit of context for you and to define what a living lab actually is, and there are many across the globe, different varieties of living lab, but I'll focus a little bit on the sort of main characteristics, their key components, and some examples, just to give you a flavor of what that would look like. And then we'll talk specifically about the Brock Lincoln Living Lab. Why is it relevant? What was the rationale? What are some of the commitments that we've made over a period of 5 years? And then what direction are we moving? So to give you an update from that initial launch event in October. So surprisingly, quite a bit has taken place despite, the end of the year and Christmas holidays, etc. So we actually met Mike and his team in mid-December and had a conversation around what this living lab looks like. So just to give you a little bit of context in terms of the research and what people are doing in practice now, living labs really it's an interesting name because a lab initially makes you think of a certain setting, right? Maybe in a chemistry lab or a physical space, often maybe at an educational institution. So it's a little bit deceiving in that living labs are actually meant to exist within a real world context. And often they have a boundary, but that boundary is a geographic area, like the town of Lincoln, for example. And what's unique about a living lab is that it's more sort of user-centric, so that we pull together basically a collaborative team that comes from, user side, private actors, public actors, as well as academics, researchers, and students to try and solve problems or challenges or even opportunities that we face. And that's done by thinking creatively, co-creating solutions. Those solutions could be around maybe an innovative product that we've come to develop or co-create, or a service, or even a process. So there's quite a bit of work that's been done to date on living labs, and what's really nice about those is that we can decide what that actually looks like between Brock and the town of Lincoln. I really like this graphic. It's the text is interesting, but I think what's more interesting is to look at the graphic and think about the ways in which we can collaborate and engage, face-to-face collaboration or discussions, coming together, bringing different people together from different parts of the community, but then also communicating through various devices, et cetera, so that we can transcend those physical boundaries, right? And in fact, this graphic shows people, all kinds of different people being the architects to develop unique products, services, et cetera, and that they can then communicate that to others and even create a network of living labs. And that graphic actually comes from a network of living labs across the globe where information is shared on how what works, what doesn't work, which I think is really interesting. Another important consideration, we talk about bringing all of these different people together in a community. What's really important about that when we're talking co-creation is also that then those products, services, processes are actually test-driven. And there's some kind of feedback that comes back to then decide, is that actually working? Is that product or service actually doing what it was meant to do, right? And that the users have power in the decision-making process. They're not just really observing what's going on. They're actively involved in that decision-making process. So some key components, this looks a little bit more technical, but obviously there needs to be an infrastructure in place for the collaboration to take place, communication to take place, that there's management of the Living Lab or governance structure that's already been established through a joint steering committee between Brock, that includes Brock and Lincoln, that there's partners and users in that, and research that's being conducted, as well as, of course, methods and tools that are used to do this creation of products or services, where the innovation is the, or can be the outcome. The outcome is some innovative product. So those are the main components. There's several examples that exist throughout Canada. So I've provided you some that are more local and then outside of province. Some really interesting material. I won't go through that now, but the third example provides you with a great example of students being embedded in a community and actively engaging in this Living Lab experience. And these students generated actually a report that came out of that collaboration that I think is really interesting. And if we think about the ways in which Lincoln could do something like that, I think it would be very beneficial to the students and obviously the community. One output product from something like a Living Lab is to actually then look at measuring, not only having these different projects, academic projects, community projects, but then also thinking about evaluating the outcomes from that and monitoring that over time to then track our progress toward certain goals that we've set for that Living Lab. So I'll go through a specific case of the Brock Lincoln Living Lab. Here's a nice graphic actually that shows Mike and Carrie, but also our president and one of our students in a co-op program, the Master of Sustainability, Science and Society at Brock. Megan Burbeck is in that photo, where she's already been working in the town of Lincoln on sustainable transportation. So a lot of the work that should be done in a Living Lab has already started, which is fantastic news, I think. And speaking with Megan, she's got a permanent smile on her face, so I can tell that it's been a rewarding experience for her. So I guess there's both teams really have a lot to gain from coming together and working together in this Living Lab. Brock, as you probably well know, is very eager to get students out into the community, taking theory, practice, and bringing that into the community, and then vice versa. We engage, we learn from that. It fosters good collaboration between faculty members like myself as well, where we look at trying to address very specific local needs, and in the case of the town of Lincoln is around sustainable planning and to advance areas like economic, social, and community development. What we've heard from the Lincoln side as well is to advance the town's overall development and become a complete community. There was a great video that Mike featured back in November, where you really drove home this idea of a complete community, and that we're thinking very carefully about the needs of the community, but then also thinking about smart growth, right? And so we got that message very clear. We understand that you have priorities around transportation, food production, economic development, and so we would like to really help you then achieve those goals of becoming a complete community. So some of the commitments then we've made within that context is to first, the initial step in that collaboration is to think about, okay, well, what are the needs of the community? And even to take stock of, what are the assets, right? To do some baseline mapping of the assets in the community, and from there expand out and think about hosting public events, engaging not only graduate students, but undergraduate students. That could include co-op students, interns, all the way to courses that are connected to the town of Lincoln in some way. And we have an example of that. And to promote and support the town of Lincoln in achieving their goals. So that's been nicely, I think, articulated, but we really see that we need an action plan, right, to really map out what that will actually look like over the next 5 years. So our team has spent a lot of time thinking about that, and now literally in the last few weeks of the beginning of a new term at Brock and the new year, we've been having really good, fruitful discussions around, the needs assessment, what's the baseline mapping activity look like. We understand that we've already done a community visioning exercise, and that's fantastic. So we can now take a look at the results of that. So you've already been actively engaging in assessing what are the needs and also thinking about what are the priorities so that we can then invest resources where you need them. To look sort of forward, where do we want to be, back up from there, and then think about what are the weaknesses, gaps, what are the opportunities for us, and then prioritize those and focus on those initially. So we actually have a course that's just started up, a grad level course. It's problem solving in the environment, and the town of Lincoln has actually provided a request for proposals, and the students in the course are now learning a whole lot about the town of Lincoln. They're communicating with me around what progress we've made thus far, and we're looking at conducting that needs assessment. So in terms of timeline, that's this sort of starting point for looking at needs is happening in this course. There's 4 students that are involved in that, working on this project, along with myself and the instructor of the course, who has a fantastic background in planning and has experience with needs assessment as well. And so we're working together. We're also working with Carrie and Mike to guide the students through that process so that they can learn about what needs assessment looks like for a community, but to also then actually bring that forward at the end of the term in the form of a report and a presentation to the town of Lincoln. So I think I'll leave it there. I think I had about 10 minutes. I hope I didn't go over that, but I thank you for listening to the presentation today. I'm really excited about the opportunities and about your enthusiasm around working with us. So thank you.
Marilyn, you aren't going to be held to 10 minutes, so.
Okay. You might regret that.
Mr. Kokopoulos, do you have anything to add at this point? And then we'll go for questions.
I mean, through you, Mr. Chairman, likewise, I can address any specific questions, but I mean, tonight was really an opportunity for Marilyn, I think, to share some of the information here for you, and so I don't necessarily have anything to say at this particular point in time, other than to highlight, and I think Marilyn's done a good job at doing that, some of the benefits we've seen to date.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
I do.
Go ahead, Councillor Patriva.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Zolino, thank you very much. I love the energy. I love the passion. And I've got a question, and maybe it's a living lab project. I wrote down actively involved in the process, and I mean, you highlighted Megan in one of your slides, and I mean, she was just a godsend with work on the transit pilot we did, our active transportation committee that Councilor Brene chairs and I'm the vice chair, cycling infrastructure and grant opportunities, like just an extra person to help maybe guide through the slugging that the staff isn't able to do. Mr. Kokopoulos, constantly tells us we're part of a lean organization. But you know what? Having been again, a co-op student and an opportunity to work in a institutional or a government agency, I think it's fantastic. You get to learn the ins and outs. Usually, and if you're good enough, you might carve a little project out for yourself. Plus, when there's opportunities, hey, we're going to go to that person because he or she knows how we like it and how we run it. So having said all that, I'm prefacing my comments here because I've got it's a pet project that I've been after our infrastructure group to look at, but they're taxed, they don't have the resources. So hoping that maybe out of the Living Lab that something like this could take some research that other organizations have done, other municipalities have done, and the idea is a living snow fence. So Living Lab, looking at a living snow fence. So it's actual problem solving in the real world environment and how that impacts not only transportation, goods movement, agriculture, because some of the the initial findings that I've come across is you go and you say to the farmer, I need you to leave in 20 rows of corn because it acts as a natural snow break. You can still use that and take that in and dry it. But something like that, would that be a Living Lab idea, concept, something that we could maybe look at? It's just, I need to get it off the ground in some way, shape, or form, and I was looking at it, and you're talking about a thesis and all that kind of stuff. I've got an unfinished one sitting there. I mean, I would even help do it because maybe I could actually put this through for mine. So maybe it's self-serving, but I think it's a good project.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I agree, and it sounds a little bit like you might want to apply for the Masters of Sustainability. So I'm the grad program director, and I'd be delighted to share your opinion. Yes, and that's what's really nice.
Could I?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I don't think my son will want me on campus with him there.
Well, we don't have to tell him. If he happens to bump into you, so be it.
Okay.
What I really like about this prospect is that I think there are a lot of great projects that are possibilities. What I've mentioned to Mike, and we had this conversation at Brock in mid-December, is that it would be nice to think about those priorities in the community, right? And try to kind of vet projects a little bit so that we are careful to make sure that you're sort of addressing the initial priority areas, right? And I don't yet have a sense of those areas, but that's really happening as we speak to come up with those priority areas. Having said that, and having a background in geospatial technologies, so geographic information systems, satellite imaging, remote sensing of the Earth's surface, I could see possibilities for that kind of work, right? Where you want to look at I'm guessing the sort of spatial arrangement of these fences and potentially where they are, where they could be, et cetera.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that is entirely possible, right? I don't yet know if that's maybe a priority for the community, but if that were, then,
I can chime in.
Being the chair of finance and admin, also reducing the workload of snowplow drivers, and I could make a case for it. So leave that.
well, and when you're thinking about
Go on a possibility. Sorry.
through you, Mr. Chair, when you're thinking about two sustainable, absolutely, communities, then I could see that you would make a good argument for that. Thank you.
I just got informed that Councillor Patrieve is off topic. I can't believe that. No. I was going to say vet his application very carefully. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased that you're here tonight to address council and to bring us up to date. And I have to say that this is one of my dreams, that we would have this campus with Brock in the midst of the working environment here. And so I'm very interested to, and Dr. Furon and I had talked about post-secondary education rates. And I know that the numbers in this area aren't very good when it comes to graduation from grade 8, I believe, although secondary school graduation has improved. So by putting an emphasis on education in our town, I'm hoping that we will set an example and encourage young people in regard to the value of education. And Dr. Ferran and I did talk about the hub that we're going to be looking into, and the possibility of having adult learning within the town, but just in a different location. So I'm interested in research in regard to this, because I have no doubt that from the way this is structured and from what you've laid out for us tonight and the big picture relationship internationally, that these projects are going to be successful. And I can hardly wait until the two students come to work in the mayor and the CAO's office, because there's some very important work to do there around policy. So the interest that I have in research is twofold. We already know that the town of Lincoln is not going to grow, let's say, beyond population of 32,000. So with that, we would also expect that we should be able to identify the ideal workforce size, and also what skills those people would have in order to maximize their size, and even to the extent of what are those skills going to be for the future that are going to be so important, because you just can't keep adding and adding and adding. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a piece of research that would have to begin now, so that there is some data collected within those first 5 years. The other part of that is what skills development over time are required of staff in a town of this size and with fixed boundaries, and what impact, what's the impact of having this campus model as part of the workforce? What's the impact on staff? Are they more motivated? Are their group skills better? Is there leadership that develops at a higher rate than it would if you didn't have this synergistic model of young students with all kinds of aspirations? Have you thought about any of that in terms of the work here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, those are excellent questions. I think first that, you know, getting to the first question I heard was around what are those skills. I think that Mario presented a nice slide with some of those skills that would be developed around being detail-oriented, problem-solving type skills that really students really need and really want to have, and employers want to see those skills as well, right? And one something that I thought of when Mario was speaking was thinking about keeping people in the community. This is one great way to do that, right? Yeah. You have someone like Megan working here in the town of Lincoln. Soon she'll graduate. then there may be, a position for her, and now she's passing on the knowledge she's learned and the skills that she's learned here to others, right? To enhance her skill set, right? We have thought, I hadn't quite thought about the impact necessarily on staff in terms of the motivation. I've done some review of the literature that suggests that there are a lot of positive outcomes and impacts when you bring together multiple actors to solving a problem, that there is more engagement, or appears to be more interest and engagement, because now people sense that their voices are actually being heard. And that's the piece around this power in decision making. And that when people feel that they have influence and power, which is an important part of, it's really a principle of a living lab, is that you do give people power, that you value their input to solving a particular problem, and that the research that exists now in multiple different types of living labs suggests that that does have a very positive impact. Now, I've only scraped the surface on, this was an assignment that came to me mid-term, last term, so this is something that I've been involved with in terms of looking at the existing literature the last month and a half to 2 months. And I have seen that kind of theme emerge. I imagine that we could definitely build that into the work that we plan to do. That would be really interesting to, I don't know that 5 years would give us long enough time period, right? But that we could definitely make, in terms of, data collection and surveys, for example, of individuals that are working in the living lab space, from staff to students to faculty, that could actually get at some of those questions, would be, I think, really would make for some really excellent research, right, and some great work.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's, the projects are great. There's no question that we're going to benefit. Very, very important. But I see this, Mr. Chairman, as this is a longitudinal impact. This, because people will be expected to work more and more and more independently, not in terms of working in isolation, but the independence of thought. And of course, I think this is where education is going, that children are being taught how to think entirely differently than we did when we were going to school. We were so dependent on the teacher telling us what to do. And so I really see the workforce as being extremely independent in the future. And for municipalities where you've got, goals and objectives set, strategic elements are all laid out, if the execution isn't really razor sharp, you can spend a lot of resources. And I see these, I really see this being very, very important to municipalities. And I'm sure it's important everywhere, but this is where I'm right now. And the other thing I'm interested in through you, Mr. Chairman, is I know that you're going to be doing you'll be using a lot of theoretical models, but how do you see the social determinants of health fitting into the work here?
Oh, that's, through you, Mr. Chair, that's a...
Do you see any of them fitting in?
I would say so. My expertise is not really on the sort of within that particular, but maybe you could be more specific about.
Well, I mean, one of the most important ones is transportation. Another
Okay.
one is housing. So
Okay, sorry.
let's just pick those two.
Okay,
And then, through you, Mr. Chairman, and then, it's a matter of, where are we at, part of that database that you're going to be collecting? And then over time, what impact does it have on our community? I mean, we heard a lot of statistics tonight. And
Yes.
from those statistics, you wouldn't think that there was anybody poor in town, or that anybody was having any difficulty with much of anything. And we probably would be very unwise to settle on that. But we really don't have any data to the contrary.
Yes.
So we're not planning for things in every case. We're doing a lot of planning, no question about it. But the social determinants of health
yes.
are the
yes,
ones that are going to
yes.
bite you.
Right. And, Mr. Chair, I wonder if that's where bringing different individuals to the table. So I understand now where you're going with that. And I think that, yes, there is, clearly these things exist, but it can be difficult to engage those groups or even know much about what's going on there, and then to plan for it can be a challenge. And I believe that you can maybe get at some of that by bringing people to the table who engage with these groups that maybe are not normally engaged with. There's been some research on that around pulling in different leaders in a community, even church groups, let's say, community care centers, for example, to try and get at those kinds of pieces.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would also say that it's a great agenda here. There's no question about it, and I certainly don't have any argument with it. I'm delighted to see this. But I think there's an element here, not just in terms of coming and telling council what has been done, but for us to also be engaged, or at least those of us who want to be engaged in the process, so that some of the research that's going to be carried out has relevance to the development of the community from the political perspective. And I would certainly hope that that is going to be the case.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kirkopoulos for a second, because I think it's a good time for him to comment on that.
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity. I think just to provide a couple of points, and I think when we go back to one of the tenets and one of the outcomes that we're looking at around complete communities, the sustainability of the community, I mean, I absolutely see the social determinants of health, specifically to your question, Mary Easton, around their influence to healthy populations and what that means from an employment perspective, from a supplies and needs perspective. And Brock, Niagara College, and the Niagara Workforce Planning Board have signed an MOU, a tripartite agreement last year, where a lot of that information sharing is happening. So I think as we go through the needs assessment and we look at what the community wants, what are some of those community desires and the engagement that needs to happen with that, absolutely council is going to be a primary and a key stakeholder in that ongoing conversation. But absolutely, I do see the social determinants of health intertwining and playing into that in terms of influencing the health of our broader population, which really does tie back to complete communities and the other objectives that we have. So just a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Carrie, you were waving your hands wildly. Do you?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was just trying to sort of interject on the social determinants of health and sort of maybe to give you, council and committee, a broader perspective a little bit on the needs assessment, looking at what those community assets are. So the pillars are the natural, built, social, economic, and public service assets. We haven't yet defined those. Those will be part of further scoping out before the needs assessment occurs. But certainly, Mayor, social determinants of health will play a very important role in the social aspect of sort of that pillar of the assets that we're looking at. The economic development strategy is going to be a key input into the economic development, the data Mario presented, the work we've done with our vision. So there is a lot, and as just to echo our CAO, council will be a key stakeholder in in the work that we're undertaking moving forward.
Thank you, Chair Foster. First of all, just, your enthusiasm is contagious. So we've been hearing for the last 3 or 4 months about this Living Lab, so it's great to have you come before us this evening and really get a better understanding, so thank you. I never said much when Mario was here because I was frantically running stats and numbers in my mind, and where the mayor is going is exactly where my mind has been running for the last hour in terms of, it's great to talk about all this stuff, but really, how can we put our fingerprint on this, and how can we take this to make this a better community? And Councillor Patriva talked about what Megan has done and how she helped us with our Bike Friendly Award and the hours and hours, countless hours. We started off at 35 and we're probably closer to 100 hours of work that she put on that Bike Friendly Award, and active transportation, and our U-Link, our pilot project for transit. So I believe last year, was it Niagara College students? Was it Niagara College students, or was it Brock students that worked down at the Jordan Museum? Niagara College. So we've had a little bit of work with this, and it's exciting. But to Mayor Easton's point, that's exactly where my mind has been running for the last hour. Is when you look at some of the statistics that Mario listed, and yes, there was some growth in the 0 to 9, but the numbers that he had up on there, we've had a 16% increase in the population between the ages of 60 to 69, 2,900 people. 15% increase in 70 to 79, 2,085 people. 19% increase in 80 plus to 1,550, which totals 6,535 people by this last census in 2016 out of a population of 20. That's 40% of people that are between the ages of 60 and 80. Anybody that has any parents that are in a position where you're looking for that take them out of their home and deal with CCAC and any of these situations that, as the mayor rolls her eyes, we're all going through it, and have parents on a waiting list for 2 years or 3 years to get into a place. We're looking at building a retirement home right here, the MC development. But these are things that excite me, that we can work with as a community with someone like Brock and your eager students to really forge the future for this community and where we're going to be when you talk about sustainability, because that's what it's all about. And affordable housing too. We continue to hear that affordable housing is a problem and will continue to be a problem. So really exciting stuff. Look forward to working with you and the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bernay. Just a quick comment from me as well. I'm really quite excited about the partnerships that the municipality has been developing. I've always thought it was quite logical for Brock and our municipality to get involved, and I'm really glad that's going down the road. Niagara College as well, in the overlap now with the various programs around food and wine and stuff like that are also excellent. I'm involved with the Western Ontario Public Administration course, and I see all these people coming through as well, and I keep thinking this would be ideal to be getting people into the local communities and let them understand what it is that's really going on here, so I commend this entire program as we're moving forward. So, and I also echo, you seem to be very enthusiastic, so that's great. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
And we really are genuinely interested in helping Lincoln achieve its goals, right? So we plan to continue to work very closely with you so that we do actually have impact, right? That we're not just conducting research for research's sake, that we're actually then mobilizing that knowledge and transferring that to the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have much else on the agenda this evening. We do have no correspondence. We have one report, and Mr. Kokopoulos, I'll turn that to you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity, I think, to provide a brief update on the library. review, something that we've been talking about for some time, and something that has, I'm going to suggest, officially begun with an email that I sent to the board this past Monday as it relates to that review. Just for council's background, we've been looking at a lot of departments across the organization, and so I think I started that comment, and I think that introduction to the library board by suggesting what we're doing comes really from council direction, but also comes as an organization as we look at partnerships, as we look at how we work better together. I highlighted, I think, for the library board, particular items specifically as it related to examining, I think, the facets of how municipalities work with libraries, and there's a number of structures and ways in which that works. I highlighted that we brought a consultant on by the name of Ken Roberts and gave them a little bit of background in from Ken's perspective. Ken was the chief librarian with the Hamilton Public Library for a number of decades. He retired in 2012 and has since been consulting and working with a lot of smaller library systems. So I think that smaller library system element really is an opportunity for us. He's worked with East Gwillimbury, as well as the Okanagan Regional Library and some libraries out in BC, in the Fraser Valley, in terms of their system. He's also worked around architectural guidelines for libraries and how libraries become community spaces, and he's done that specifically around small and rural library facilities, actually publishing a lot of papers and is really seen as an expert in that particular area. I thought it was important to share some of that with the board so that they know the individual we're bringing on has had a lot of experience dealing with these particular items. He is also part of Canada's expert panel on the future of Canada's libraries and archives, and again has worked and looked at governance. I really do see this project as two-phased, and the first phase is a joint effort by the board, the library leadership, and the municipality to already look at the system. I did echo that I think the system functions well at this particular point in time, but there are best practices around Ontario specifically, and with the ministry that look at governance of libraries and how municipalities work with libraries. And so I think libraries are also acting more as those centers for, I'm not going to call them bringing people together, but community hubs in a lot of ways, and I use the term hub loosely, but they really do act that way. Another element to this that I did throw out to the library board, and I know Councillor McMillan is not here, but Councillor Foster, Chair Foster can speak to it a little bit more, and that is really what I see as phase two, and something that the library has identified that they want to do, and that is that needs assessment piece. What do the facilities need or not need? What is the future of the library from a needs assessment perspective? And although the libraries highlighted they were doing that individually and separately, I did make a comment that should be something I see as us working collaboratively on moving forward, because I think when I look at community services and the responsibility around facilities, when I look at some of the programming that is happening, when I look at how we assist them from an HR perspective, now from an IT perspective, we are intimately and I think integrally linked as two organizations, albeit one functioning with a board governance and one functioning through council. Budgets are approved still around the horseshoe here. So I did express that as we go through that, I don't believe that the library is also budgeted enough for their needs assessment, so I think that opportunity to work with us in that, and look at a collaborative way of doing it, I think addresses some of the financial elements that potentially, could come from that. And rather than having two reports, I think there is a benefit to having one report. So that is where we're at. That first phase is really looking at best practices around governance. The second phase is a needs assessment, and so I can answer any questions. And Chair Foster, you may have anything that I may have missed there.
Yeah, I just to let you guys know, when Mike came to me back a while ago and said he was talking to Ken Roberts, I was absolutely thrilled. Ken Roberts to libraries is Wayne Gretzky to hockey. Okay, I mean that's how good he really is. So we're going to be very well taken care of as we go through this process. I was at the library board meeting last night. I came away not very happy. I got lectured by the library board chair that I know nothing about the Public Libraries Act. So suffice to say to all of you, I know the Public Libraries Act inside and out. So there's a little bit of work is going to have to be done on the phase 2. I think we're being very magnanimous, talking to the library and saying you really need this needs assessment. Don't be coming to us at budget time saying, oh, we're going to build a library in Prudhoe's. Where's your proof? Where's your numbers? Where's the statistics? You know, Mayor Easton is the one that brings it up all the time, basically saying we have to make fact-based decisions. We don't make decisions based on, gee, it would be a great idea. So anyway, I'm really pleased that Ken's going to be involved with this. And I hope the library board and the chief librarian are wise enough to really truly make use of this resource that we're now providing and making available. So, okay. Mayor Easton?
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased that the CAO has stated what the most appropriate plan is going forward. And you know, I think the behavior is pretty typical in terms of the response, you know, when you start to, you know, when you need to. This reminds me of the alternate service delivery meeting about housing that I was at this morning, when you have the Niagara Regional Housing in the region, and the board of Niagara Regional Housing don't want the region to be involved in any way, shape, or form, and yet the system isn't as robust as it needs to be in order to serve the client. So, I mean, the thing is, there's just too much money involved here. And so it has to come that this review has to be done. And, but I will also say, Mr. Chair, and Julie, the clerk, the legislative assistant, and I had a conversation this week about the kind of orientation that's going to have, and the selection process that's going to have to go on in the next term with public boards, and especially the appointees that we have. And not only are people going to have to be recruited differently, they are going to have an orientation so they understand what their responsibilities are. Because we shouldn't have these surprises in attitude. If, you know, we have to be able to recruit people that are moving in the same direction. And it has been very difficult this term for sure with this particular board, but I think we just have to go forward. I think the route is clear, and that's just the way it has to be, so.
Just to add to what you're saying, Mayor Easton, actually, there is a pretty good library board that's in place. The only problem is that there seems to be a bit of leadership vacuum that's going on. So, and that's the type of thing that we have to look at going into the future and making sure that we develop the right leaders. And if you remember when we were going through and doing our interviews last time, that was one of the questions that we asked everyone that came through was, would you be willing to take a leadership role within this? And unfortunately, when push came to shove, a variety of the people that we put on really in the end didn't want to do that. So we need to really look for those solid leaders within the community to go and do these things. So, yeah.
I can say to you that earlier yesterday, Ms. Brigatino and myself had a meeting with a gentleman that came in to talk about the volunteer bank that they have in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And again, you know, if people are going to volunteer, their highest comfort level when they know exactly what is expected of them and they know how to do it and they have whatever tools they need. So I think there's a big opportunity here. And so I'm very satisfied that the process that's in place is going to go forward, and these other things we'll deal with.
Councillor Timmers.
I tend to agree. I think this is a really good process that's going to happen, and it's much needed as well. As far as the boards and committees, we definitely do need to review how we find people, how we advertise for people, how we orientate the people that come on to these boards and committees, because I know I was one of the people that sat on the interview committee. I don't know if you were, Diane and Rob. Were you as well, Tony? You know, we had a very small pool of people that actually applied for these positions, and that makes it really difficult when you have just a handful of people to pick from. So I don't know how we can expand it or increase our interest and get a bigger pool of people. I think we really need to look at that and try to get some better talent applying.
If I can add, Councillor Timmers.
Varied people,
If I can add, and maybe actually you could throw an opinion here as it's going on, like from the library point of view, there is absolutely excellent resources that are available through the OLA to bring boards up to speed, to go and do things. I mean, like we have the same thing with the AMO. There's things that are there to go and help teach us, all the different things that we have to do. But for some reason, they were a little reluctant to do that with the board. And again, I think it's something we as council maybe have to sit down and say, thou shalt use the resources available to you to help teach your boards how to do stuff. I mean, Margaret Andrews is another expert on the thing. Like, if Ken is Gretzky, she's what's her name, the Wickenheiser. I mean, we have resources that are available, and so it's. Is that okay, John? Using that one? Okay. Yeah.
If I could just add to that, I agree. The first couple of years that I sat on the library board, and from the very, very beginning, I was looking for training. I was looking for some kind of education to the board of what are we here for, what are we doing, and it just wasn't happening. And then it was we were self-directed, go off and take this online course, but it just didn't happen. So I do agree it has to be something that's implemented and it's more structured, and that's going to happen here, kind of generated from here. So.
For that update. Are there any councillor inquiries? Any notices of motion, John? No. Announcements? We don't have a closed session, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting.